Yeah. We're going to show a little photo up here. See that little girl? That was my mother. And that little girl was going to go through a lot of stuff in her life, have a lot of experiences, beautiful experiences and very challenging experiences. And that little girl was going to express a lot of that beautiful light that you can see in her as a little girl. And I want to share today some life lessons that I learned from my mother. Some of them are from positive characteristics of my mother, and some of them are from some of her own personal growth lessons. Let's put it that way. And I'd like to encourage you too. Part of why am I giving this message today? First of all, this is the first time I've ever put into one message lessons that I've learned from my mother. So I'm excited about doing that. It's to not only learn from some of the ideas, to remind us of some of the ideas, but also maybe to encourage you to think about what are some lessons that you have learned from significant people in your life as well. The first lesson I learned from my mother, and there's a lot of them, I just sort of narrowed them down to a few this morning, that is to love everybody. That little girl, that little blonde-haired girl, born in Richmond, Virginia, really loved everybody. She was open to people no matter what their race, what their sexual orientation was, what their nationality was. It did not matter to her. She was a friend to everyone who got to know her, and she got to know them. And she was fascinated by people. That little girl, a few years later, she used to share the story about how she couldn't understand as a little girl in Richmond, Virginia, why her friend had to sit in the back of a bus. And so she would sit in the back of the bus with her little friend. And that little girl grew up to marry a Jewish man. She was raised Christian, but she married a Jewish man. And she said that she converted, you guys paying attention back there with the pictures? She, trying to cue you, there you go. So here's my mother with two of her husbands. Her first husband, the man with the hat underneath the menorah, was the man that she married first, my dad, a Jewish man. Now, she converted to Judaism, she says, before she even married my dad, because she loved her Uncle Ben, who was Jewish, who had married a Christian woman. And so she, and the other man was my stepfather, Henry. So you could see, here she is smiling big with her two husbands. No animosity there. She loved the father of her kids and her current husband. She was open to the various religions, didn't matter what religion you were. And my mother just loved everybody. And what a wonderful lesson it was for me as a child to grow up with a mother who was so open like that. Probably one of my favorite pictures of my mother expressing how she just saw people as people. It didn't matter what race they were. It didn't matter what their sexual orientation. It didn't matter what religion they were. She saw people, just like that little girl, that little blonde-haired girl, saw another human being. And one of my favorite pictures is this next one. That was my mother. This was with she served on the NAACP Legal Redress Committee. And they would address people who had gone to jail or prison unlawfully. It wasn't fair, it wasn't just. They would look into that. And the lady she's shaking hands with there, Kendra Smith, was a 19-year-old in college when she met an older man who she didn't know at the time had a drug ring. He had $4 million of drugs he was trafficking. And she didn't know that until later as the relationship unfolded. And she, out of fear for her life, Kendra ran some drugs, delivered some drugs somewhere. And one day her boyfriend showed up dead. And so what did the law do? They held Kendra responsible for her boyfriend's activities that they could no longer charge him for. So that's who she was holding hands with there. One of the groups she was involved in. My mom attended all black churches. Didn't matter to her. She loved everybody. And we had friends. Everyone was welcome in our home. But my mom was kind of scrappy. She was scrappy. If she heard somebody make any racist remarks, she would get really mad. My mom was a member of the Guardian Angels and was also a volunteer for the fire department, the Red Cross disaster teams, the ambulance. She was a volunteer for, later on in her life, the Citizens FBI, the Citizens Police Academy. My mom could be scrappy. And she told me of two situations in the grocery store where she heard someone make a racial remark, a racist remark, and she threatened to deck the person. Now, I don't approve of that kind of behavior. I don't care even if it's racism. I don't think violence is the answer, but my mom felt that strongly about stuff. It reminds me of Dr. Maya Angelou, who took a bold approach. She said, "I will not allow a racial or sexual slur against anyone in my home. Thoughts are things. Words are things, and I believe they go into your furniture, into your upholstery. They go into your clothes, into your carpet. They're sitting in your pot when you go to make a pot of rice. Someone who uses a racial pejorative in my house, I want him or her to take their stuff and leave. Because of that, I have a healing home. People come to my home and are healed." And that's kind of how my mom was. A second life lesson I learned from my mother is truth is one and paths are many. Truth is one, paths are many. After she converted to Judaism, my mom converted, she kept kosher. She went to synagogue on holidays, that's when we went. But she, even after she divorced my dad, she lit candles for Hanukkah and still wanted to celebrate Jewish holidays. And later on in her life, in the late 70s, she started to study yoga philosophy. That was back in the days when yoga was kind of weird. How many of you remember those days? It's been a long time ago. Now it's on every street corner. It's taught in businesses and so on and so forth. But this was way back. She studied with one of the great yoga teachers. Some of you may know him. He came from India, Swami Satchidananda, who came from India. There's a picture of him. Looks like a Swami, doesn't he? He came from India to the United States on the invitation of the great artist Peter Max, who invited Satchidananda to the U.S., and he taught, and the people loved him so much that he stayed in the U.S. and continued to teach. Carole King, the singer, was one of his students. In fact, she made a huge donation to help buy a lot of his land for his ashrams. But he was a teacher for my mother. And my mother would hold these special gatherings in her home. And one of the ideas that Satchidananda taught was truth is one and paths are many. That it doesn't matter what path religion people are on, there's no right religion. There are different ways to the one truth. It's like we're all climbing the same mountain, and as you get to the top, you see, oh, the Buddhists are climbing the mountain, the Hindus are climbing, the Jewish people, the Christians, the atheists, the agnostics. Everyone's climbing the mountain of truth, whether they recognize it or not. And so that's what Satchidananda taught. And I love Satchidananda because he was so playful and joyful. And they used to have these gatherings in our house. My mom did every Sunday. So my stepfather and I would play golf, and then we'd come home and later in the day, early evening, and there would be these folks in the living room chanting and meditating, and they look like hippies. And he'd go off to his room and watch football, and I'd go off to my room and study and do homework. So that's kind of what I grew up in. Well, when I really needed those ideas, as some of you know, in my first year, I actually picked up one of her books as a senior in high school. It was called To Know Yourself by Swami Satchidananda. And in it, he said, you're created in the image of happiness, the image of joy. God is happiness. God is joy. You're created in the image of that presence. And I thought, if that's true, that's the solution to all of life's problems. Because where does greed come from? Where does selfishness come from? It's looking for stuff outside, right? Look at Russia. What's happening? They're trying to take over the Ukraine. Why? Because they think if they can get more power, more stuff, more control, more of this, more of that, then things are going to be better for them. Well, that is a delusion. And it's a great delusion we've all have been caught up in. So that's what triggered me. And then in college, my freshman year, where I was kind of lost, I picked that book up again. And it gave me a lifeline. It gave me a direction to move in. So my mother was a big influence on, without me even realizing it, on my spiritual journey. I believe souls sort of maybe have a pact with one another. We're here to teach each other. And my mother was here to teach me, and without even really saying a word. She never preached to me. It's just what she did. One summer, she went away for the whole summer. I was like 13 years old. She went away for the whole summer to study with Swami Satchidananda and to take yoga teacher training. And after that training, this is how she looked. You got that picture, folks? I don't know if you can see that, but that's one of my favorite pictures of her. She looks like an angel. She is so radiant from that training that she went through, that yoga, that meditation, that healthy eating that they were doing. For years, I kept her picture on my meditation altar because I thought, she looks like an angel there. And it's neat to see, those of you who heard the music earlier, how these songs just tie right in with the message, isn't it? I didn't know those songs were going to be like that when I prepared this message. They just tie right in. My mother was she was a wonderful influence on me spiritually, that truth is one and paths are many. Swami Satchidananda loved her as well. He gave her an Indian name, which was Jyoti, which means light. Light. Lesson number 3. That I learned from my mother, and this is more from her growth experiences, her growth opportunities. And I know not everyone has had a wonderful experience with their mother. Some people have had really tough experiences with their mother. Some people couldn't stand their mothers. And I'd like to just say at this point that I believe that all love, this is my belief, that all love flows from the one great love, which is spirit, which is God. God is love. And if we don't have a great mother or a great relationship with our mother, that love can come through other people. It can come through friends. That nurturing compassion or whatever that is can come through friends. It can come through men. It doesn't have to be from a woman. It could come from somebody else, that wonderful love. But also, no matter who our mother might have been, we can learn lessons even from the things we had troubles with. So, lesson number 3 is that mothers are people too. Mothers are people too. When I went to college and started to read the Bible, because I remember I was raised Jewish. What am I doing reading the New Testament? Well, I wondered. I needed somebody to look up to in my life at that point. And I thought, what about Jesus? Jesus influenced millions and millions of people. Let me learn more about him. So I started to read the scriptures, read the Old Testament, New Testament. Came to the 10 Commandments. Honor your mother and your father. I thought, I need to take that more seriously. How can I honor my mother and my father more? Well, I started to want to really live that in my life, because I think, you see more and more kids talking to their parents like disrespectfully. I don't know, any of y'all see that around you? Talking to your parents, like the parent is some kind of servant, or like the parent owes you something, or the parent's there to meet your needs and that's all that matters. Like they're not a human being in and of themselves. Well, I learned that mothers are people too. When I was new into metaphysics, as a lot of newbies are, I wanted to preach to my mother. Mom, don't be so negative. Mom, think more positive. Mom, this, mom, that. How many of y'all done that to a loved one? Read this, read that. You need to watch Justin. You need you need to come to Unity. Whatever it is, right? We do that. And I did that to her. And one day she said to me, "You think you're so perfect." And another thing she said to me is, "Charity starts in the home, Justin." And what was the lesson? The lesson was, if somebody's not receptive to what you have to say, don't say it. Love them spiritually. In other words, see the presence of God within them and trust that they're on their own journey. You don't have to change them. You don't have to make them over. Pray for them. Know the truth for them. And trust that. You don't have to preach. You don't have to say, you got to read this, you should read that. Don't be negative, be positive. That doesn't usually work very well, does it? People aren't very receptive to that. And I had a challenging relationship with my mother. I loved her, I respected her in many ways, but also I didn't like my mother that much sometimes. I just didn't like her sometimes. She was tough to live with, really, for me. She was difficult to live with in many ways. So it was challenging, and I wanted to change her. Once I was on this metaphysical path, and I learned, no, wait a minute. Stop trying to change her. I want to honor my mother and my father, and so I started to make the effort, how can I have a better relationship with my mother? How can I heal the resistance that I have around my mother? You see, my mother used to talk 99.9% of the time. When she was at the ashram for that whole summer, they had silent days, and they actually had to put tape over my mother's mouth because she wouldn't stop talking. That's one way you get away from the mind. If it's not pleasant inside your mind, One way to do it is just talk constantly, and that's a way to get outside of your mind. You're constantly focused, in talking. People do it through other addictions, drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping, you name it. There's a lot of ways that we try to get away from our inner unpleasantness. My mom talked, and it could get on your nerves got on my nerves after a while. And so I wanted to heal that. I started to think about what my mom had gone through in her life. I started to want to develop compassion for her so that I could get past, anybody ever do this? She's my mother. She ought to be this way. She ought to be more interested in what I'm doing and what my life is happening in my life. We have these she ought to be about mothers, right? She ought to be this way. She should be this way. We have these expectations around mothers or parents of how they ought to be, right? How many of you have done that before or know somebody who does? We have these expectations. So I started to learn that my mom is a person with her own needs, her own desires, she's seeking joy and happiness just like I am, just like everyone else is. I started to see her as a person, not as my mother and all the attachments that go along with that. Does that make sense? I started to try to develop compassion for her, not for my expectations of what she ought to be doing or how I thought she should be, but rather this is a person who's been through a lot in her life. My mother was raped as a teenager. My mother's mother rejected her, didn't like her, favored her older sister. So my mom was a daddy's girl. A lot of other stuff happened. She had cancer 3 times in her life. She went through a lot. So I tried to focus on seeing my mom as a person, not as just my mom. And I started to develop compassion for my mother. And one thing that really helped, I met with a spiritual coach one time, and he said to me, Justin, you can be a teacher for your mother. Not verbally, not preaching, but you can be a teacher to your mother just like Jesus was a teacher to his mother. And that helped free me from expecting my mother to be a certain way. It helped me realize, no, wait a minute, I'm expecting her to be a certain way, and I'm stop that. I'm going to let her be who she is and focus on being my best self. See the difference there? There's a tremendous freedom when we stop looking at our parents, expecting them to be a certain way. This is how I look at it, once we're out of the house, they've kind of done their job, whatever that job was, and now we're adults. Now it's up to us to grow and unfold and to mature and to develop our own spiritual self. So, mothers are people too. That was the next lesson. Lesson number 4, love yourself and be authentic. Love yourself and be authentic. And, that last lesson taught me how to think less of myself and to start being present more to my parents. Start to be compassionate and giving and helpful and empathetic toward my parents, So, lesson number 4 is love yourself and be authentic. It took my mother years, I think, before she finally started to love herself. Took her years. Okay, she loved everybody else. She was open to everyone else. but she still needed people's approval. She still needed people's validation. She still was looking outside for people to approve of her. And that was one of the things that annoyed me, is because she was constantly trying to get validation. And I don't know about you, but if you have someone constantly trying to get validation from you, it makes you not want to validate them. Right? Please like me, please like me, please like me, please praise me, please praise me, please praise me. You know, they're not saying it like that, but they're saying it with, look what I did, look what did this, da 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 da, look what I'm doing, look what this. Well, so one of her challenges, and she was a very sensitive person. She didn't like to hurt people's feelings. She really didn't. She was very sensitive like that. But tied into it was she also didn't want people to disapprove of her. She wanted people to like her. I know none of us can relate to that at all, right? Look at the youth today, teenagers, the high suicide rate these days. Teenagers are filling up emergency rooms because there's no place for them to go because they're having suicidal thoughts. Social media, you're looking at how wonderful everybody else's life is, you know, and it makes you start to not feel good about you. So she, I don't think, maybe because of her early experiences, never really until much later, she was always looking for people's approval, I think, and trying to prove that she was worthwhile, and it was through the eyes of other people. Consequently, she couldn't say no. You know, friends would want to, you know, do stuff, and she didn't want to do certain things. Instead of saying no, she'd go and do it and then resent it. How many of you have been there? I remember one friend in particular who was kind of tough to be around, who was really constantly wanting to spend a lot of time with my mother or something like that. My mother would complain, but she would never say no and draw boundaries. So consequently, I learned to draw boundaries. I learned to begin to love myself, to find my own worth, to recognize that as a child of God, you don't need everybody else to love you. You don't need, in fact, the more you approve of yourself and love yourself, you find that you don't need other people's approval and love. It's nice to have, but you don't need it. That's a key. That's a big key. If you don't love yourself, you're constantly going to be, you know, what do they think about me? Well, they don't like me. I don't know why they don't like me. You know, I can't say no. Then you struggle with saying no to friends and no to this or no to that because they may not like me or they may not want to be my friend anymore. They might leave me or, you know, they might abandon me. What am I going to do? They don't like me. That's a worth issue. I like myself. I approve of myself is what I'm talking about. Where you approve of yourself. You love yourself. You know that you're valuable because God created you. You know that you're valuable because you're an expression of God. You know that you matter because you're here on the planet. Not because your kids appreciate you, not because your friends appreciate you, not because people praise you and tell you how wonderful you are. You don't need that. It's nice, but you don't need it. My mother didn't know that. And it caused her a lot of frustration and a lot of angst over the years. You are valuable, not because you're smart, not because you're rich, not because you got friends, not because you're popular, not because you're spiritual. You're not valuable because of any of that stuff. You're valuable because you are a human being who exists. You're a one-of-a-kind expression of spirit. You're valuable to God. You're valuable to life. There's a reason you're here. And it doesn't depend on anybody out here appreciating you. My mom didn't know that. maybe until much later. Much later when she started to see through people's stuff and realized, why am I trying to please these people? They don't care about me that much. Why should I need their approval? I don't need their approval. Eventually she got to that point where she was much less concerned about what people thought. So that was a lesson. Love yourself. Find your own worth. And be authentic. You see, that's part of it, because my mother was very gregarious and fun and funny, and she was charming in public, but at home she could be very not pleasant, difficult. And what that taught me was, I don't want to be like that. I want to be congruent. The person I am at home, I want to be the same person at home as I am in public. I don't want to put on a facade of look how wonderful I am to people who are friends or people who are acquaintances, and then not be that nice at home. Now, my mom could be really sweet and wonderful at home, but it was up and down at home. You know the old thing. Stop doing that. Pick up your shoes, blah, 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 blah. Ring, ring, ring. Hello? How are you? Yeah, so wonderful to see you. And how many people are like that? They leave the house. Oh, hi, Olivia. Wonderful, Well, to me, that's kind of fake. It should be that the people we are closest to ought to be the people we love the most. They ought to get our very best, not the strain. Everybody could, but it seemed to be the other way around. Talk nasty to the people we love the most and then go out and be wonderful to everyone else. Well, that's backwards. That's backwards to me. And, I'm exaggerating a little bit, my mother, but that's kind of how it felt sometimes. I didn't like that about my mother, how she could be that way. But it was instructive. It helped me. I wanted to do it a little differently. And so that was a lesson. So lessons, love everybody. Truth is one, paths are many. Mothers are people too. Love yourself and be authentic. And I have a little exercise for you. What are some things that you learned from your mother? What did you learn from the positive characteristics of your mother? What did you learn from some of her growth opportunities from your mother? What are some things that maybe you didn't have any? Good for you. Well, maybe you did. What are some things that rubbed you the wrong way that you can learn from and grow from? And those of you online, feel free to put something down in the chat about what you learned from your mother. And the last life lesson is to know who you are. Know who you are. My mother had cancer 3 times. The first time she had uterine cancer. Almost died from it. Got a staph infection in the hospital. Almost died from the staph infection. I was in college. And Swami Satchidananda, at one of the gatherings, someone had told him that she had this cancer, and he said in front of everyone, "Jyoti, you are going to be all right." And she was. She almost died, but she was all right. The second time was years later. She got breast cancer. She had a mastectomy. She had 4th stage breast cancer. I think she was afraid to go to the doctor and get it checked out earlier. And she got a wrong diagnosis at one point too. So they removed, that breast, and she had a mastectomy. And it was here that I really learned what my mother really believed. See, my stepfather and I think we kind of thought the yogi stuff, the meditation, the chanting, and all this was back then. We thought, Mom is just doing her thing. It's unique, it's different, she gets to socialize, it's her thing. But only when she went through these challenges did I realize how deep her spirituality was. My mother told me, having had fourth-stage breast cancer, and when you have fourth-stage breast cancer, usually it comes back at some point. And my mother said to me, Justin, I'm not afraid of death. I am a spiritual being. I'm not afraid of death. And that made an impression on me. Wow. If that's all she learned from her yoga, that is powerful. Very powerful. She was not afraid of dying because she knew that she was a spiritual being. I thought, wow, this really ran deep in my mother. And then, the doctors told her, you need to have chemotherapy for this breast cancer or you're going to be dead in 6 months. And my mother listened to her body. She told the doctors, because she got allergic to stuff, she said, no, I'm not having chemotherapy. I'm not going to do it. She had radiation, but she would not do chemotherapy. I'm not saying that's right for everybody, but my mom knew she was not going to have chemotherapy done. And the doctors told her, if you don't have chemotherapy, we're not going to even see you. We're not going to treat you. And they didn't. And my mother didn't have chemotherapy, and that's somebody standing up to authorities, okay? My mother was married to a barber, and she was divorced from a lawyer, and it didn't matter that the surgeon told her, you better have this chemotherapy. She said, I will not. And every year, for the next 13 years, she told me, she would dress up in her best clothes and she would go to those doctors and she would say, I'm still here. And then the cancer came back after 13 years. But you know what? A lot of her friends some of her friends who had cancer and did go the traditional route, they died. But she lived for like 13 years after, which is a long time with fourth-stage breast cancer. And it came back into her bones. So it came back as bone cancer. And I used to be concerned. I was like, I'd seen movies of people crying out in pain and stuff, and I had people tell me, that's very painful. And the miracle of pain medicine, this really helped keep her fairly comfortable. And the last few months of her life, I oversaw her care from New York City. I would call every day, make sure she was getting her medicine and stuff like that. And visit her every couple months. And the last few months, I went and visited her, very thin at this point. And I said, Mom, you don't have to stick around. You can leave if you want to. We're going to be all right. And I feel like giving somebody permission to die is a good thing. Mom, you can go. It's okay. We're going to be all right. Your husband, Henry, is going to be all right. He was in a nursing home. And she said, no, I'm enjoying myself. I thought, she's enjoying herself in a hospital bed with bone cancer. Wow. Wow. Months after my mom's death, there was a period where I was thinking about her a lot. I just found my thoughts going to her. I found, I wasn't missing her. I wasn't sad, but I kept thinking about her. And it was during this period that my stepfather, Henry, who was in a nursing home, he had been under hospice care, and then they suddenly dropped him because he was doing so well. Isn't that ironic? They only take care of you if you're dying. Well, he was doing so well, he was thriving, they dropped him. And I was concerned about him. I was like, oh no, now he's going to be just in the care of the nursing home. He was doing so well with the hospice care, and I was concerned about him. And I wondered if my mom wasn't like an angel who was concerned about me, trying to reach me, trying to comfort me. I wondered that. And then I got a text message from a friend who told me he was just at a funeral for a woman who was like his mother, who had been like a mother to him after his own mother died. And I shared with him how I had been thinking of my mother lately a lot. Then he sent me a copy of a poem that he read at this woman's funeral. And the title was this: Your Mother is Always with You. And he goes, not over. The next day I was at a staff meeting here at Unity, and one of the staff who was transcribing clips of my videos, she asked me, she said, what are we going to be doing for Mother's Day? Are we going to be giving out carnations this year? And then I said, then I brought up Father's Day in June, I brought that up. And she said, it's funny you should mention Father's Day, because I just watched a video that you had done, and I just finished transcribing a talk on honor your father and your mother. And in it, you quoted your mother, things that she had said to you several times. And so the Divine Mother that expresses through people we love, expresses through our own mothers, is always present. Remember the words of Jesus, lo, I am with you always. The I am, the presence, is with you always. Let's get still for a moment. And we acknowledge that the presence and activity of Spirit is with us always. And that no matter what our relationship with our mother might have been, maybe it was mixed, maybe there was a lot of joy, maybe there was challenges, maybe a mixture of both. There were certainly lessons in the experience. There were certainly wonderful things that we can learn from that. And from our message today, we acknowledge that every person, before they're a mother, before they're a father, they're a person. They're on their own journey of growth and unfoldment. And we thank you, Father, Mother, God, for teaching us through our mothers on this Mother's Day. And we celebrate the good that we have experienced with our mothers. And we celebrate the lessons of growth. We acknowledge that as spiritual beings, perhaps our souls have made a pact with our parents, in this case with our mothers, to be teachers for one another, to learn and grow from one another. And underneath it all, we acknowledge that you, Spirit, are our one divine Mother. You're the source of all love. You're the source of all peace. You're the source of all comfort. And we thank you for that. And so it is. Amen. I'd like to thank our musicians who were with us today. Wonderful music related to Mother's Day and sacred love and the love of mothers. Let's give a nice warm hand to Stowe Daly, Karen Taylor Good, and Daniel Namod for their wonderful music that they shared with us this morning. For those of you who are here in person in our space today, feel free to come on down to Sangha space down below. We have some wrapped snacks and stuff for you. So if you'd like to come down and interact a little bit, that's happening. And also a reminder, we're going to be doing a retreat the end of September. So mark your calendar. That last weekend in September, we'll let you know more details coming up. And Sunday school, every second and fourth Sunday. So that's happening if you know anyone who has children or you have kids you want to bring. So that's what we got there. And I invite you to join me now for the prayer for protection. Together, the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Yea, God. God bless you, and namaste.